All right, Bernie. It's 2024. Happy New Year, my friend.
Hey, it was a good New Year's. I slept all night. I slept through all the fireworks.
Well, that's an awesome experience, and I'm glad that you did, my friend. I mean, I can only imagine. So we didn't do anything. I didn't do anything crazy for New Year's.
Well, define crazy.
I can't for this
I got
interview.
a lot of definitions for crazy if you want to get into one.
Oh, absolutely.
No, I I could tell you a couple of people who are absolutely the king of observation and crazy.
I know you definitely can with what you did in the Marine Corps and your keen aspects of observation.
Well, I appreciated everything that you and Dale discussed. Uh, I mean, it was I'm overwhelmed by the generosity of both of your opinions. I just I was most pleased to see that your interview with Dale went well, and he's really a legend in his own time. Some people call him a legend in his own mind, but I prefer to call him a legend in his own time. But yeah, I was very pleased to see that, and his sentiment was very dear and sincere, and what he says is valid. I can validate.
Now, and speaking of this, you and Dale had a nickname when you were in country that I understand.
Oh yeah, and whether it was deserved or not, we were called the Gold Dust Twins by our commanding officer, Mock Arnold, at that time. He he thought he thought we kind of were just beyond a reproach. In other words, we as long as we kept providing copy, they were turned a kind of a blind eye to some of the jinx and things that we were doing. But we produced a lot of copy, and so as a result, when we may have made a few mistakes or a few challenges to the Marine Corps orders, he was down at the general's office every Monday trying to get us out of trouble. But yeah, we had a long time together. Dale and I started out back in 1966 at El Toro when he was a corporal and I was a lance corporal, and you know we kind of we kind of bonded at that time, and then as time went on, he and I ended up together. He rotated in at about the time I was at November time or October, November, and we were delighted to see each other again, and we struck up the same friendship we'd always had, and we it was by half accident that we even got together because he was coming in as a radio man and I was coming in as a writer, so there wasn't usually a normal bond between. I mean, we were respected each other for their work, but the radio guys we always thought were just, they're kind of faking it. They're out there with headquarters. They don't get involved. Well, he and I had a discussion when we first joined up. We said, we're not going to do this crap. We're not going to do the usual, what they expect from us. We're going to give them honest to God, hardcore interviews with real combat Marines instead of strategic, you know, battalion and company commanders. We were going to do the original. And so anyway, that as I said, I was most kind. It was for what he said about me. But I think, in all honesty, same thing can be said for him. Sorry to get off the subject. Go right back. Question.
Bernie, you're not off the subject at all. It leads into it. So, what's one of your favorite memories of you and Dale in country with some of the shenanigans you would get into?
Well, I think the most important one, and one which will live in both of our minds, is when we went to Crane Tree up in November. We went up to Quang Tree and we went in what had been the first Marine, first Arvin had a compound in Quang Tree, but they were defeated and pushed back. And so Quang Tree was basically an occupation that they moved First Marines and the Second Marines and our Third Marines into. And so we had this area that we were taking over from the South Vietnamese that were defeated. And so we were working with our companies, and they moved us into a building that was burned out and threw a GP tent over it so it was somewhat dry because of monsoon season. And we were going out on patrols. We were going out with the Marines. We were writing stories on some of the content or Quine Tree stories. Operation Medina comes to mind. And the end, what happened was uh, round about the end of November, first part of December, I got sick, and I was really sick with um, what we called pneumonia, walking pneumonia, and at the same time I had some kind of a fever. And so Dale and I were living, headquartered in this burned out building tent, uh, with a tent over us, and in the back behind us was a bunch of tent spegs, which were made out of cedar, and they were substantially large, and they were big, and they were used to rise up the top of the GP tent. And I continued to get sicker and sicker. And Dale went out and he got a bunch of little cans of crackers. Crackers came in metal cans. And so they were like, if you could get a hold of a metal can, you know, Dale devised a subject. He came up with a chimney for the damn thing. And it was freezing cold. I mean, no matter how many blankets you put on, it was still freezing cold. And so he was, you know, in order to keep me from freezing up and getting sicker, I refused to let him take me to a corpsman because I figured the corpsman would tag me and send me out of there. And I told him, I said, no, we're not going to do that. I'll be okay. Just give me a couple of days. And so he he built this little stove out of these 4-decker tin cans, and he put a chimney on it, and then he proceeded to cut all the tent pegs, the cedar tent pegs, to feed the stove. So he was burning like 4 and 5 of these big tent pegs, and things were going well. I was getting better, and the first sergeant showed up one day. He hadn't bothered to come and check on us until this day, and he found out that Dale had carved up all these tent pegs. And he said, you two will be standing in front of the colonel tomorrow morning at 0800 to explain how you destroyed government property. Well, Dale said, there's only one thing we can do. We got to run. So we we gave we gave. I was still sick, but we could get our gear together. And he said, we got to get out of here. First truck going anywhere. I don't care where it's going. We're getting on it. And so we got on the first truck going to Contienne. And that's how we ended up in Contienne in time for Thanksgiving or Christmas. Excuse me, Christmas.
That's incredible. The lengths he went to, of course, keep you warm, but also the hightailing it out of there before 0800.
Pardon?
It's incredible the lengths that he went to keep you warm to try to make
Oh
you sure
yeah.
that you were getting better, but also how you were able to get out to buy 0800 to see the colonel the next morning.
Oh yeah. Yeah. They were after us. They had information on our record books and everything. And so there was no doubt we were going to be in big trouble if we didn't pack our gear and get out of there. And of course, it was easy to pack gear and just disappear into convoys or helicopters. And as long as we knew we were going to be out of First Regiment headquarters, we'd be okay.
Well, you and Dell spent a lot of time together, and Bernie, we've talked about Way City, but we haven't concluded with Way City. So for the latter part of Way, what's the experience like for Steve Bernston? What's going on as the fighting starts to come to a close with 1-5 in the Citadel?
Um, it's interesting. Um, Once we crossed over into the north side, it was a whole new battlefield, a whole new series of experiences, because it was just as you recognize the grand, the difference between the first or the north and the south of the river. The north side was very much under the control of the NVA. They'd had all the time set up fields of fire, do things like that. Um, when one, I was with 1-5 at the time. Uh, well, no, excuse me. I was with Delta 1-5. Dale was with Charlie 1-5. And we were trying to assist a couple of combat civilian reporters, which was supposedly in our job title. Truth of the matter was, we always asked them, "Do you want us to help you?" And they said no. So we just did. We weren't going to get in the way of the civilians. They had their own objectives. But the thing that I kept remembering was I looked at every morning we'd get up and we'd look at that big NVA flag flying over the Citadel. And I said, I'm going to be here for that. Or when we take that down, I'm going to be here. That's another great story. So that's why I kept going forward with the 1-5, or excuse me, hotel. I get confused. With Delta 1-5, they called it Dying Delta for a good reason. Um, so I just realized that in order to make my objective, which would be in my mind a great story, a big story about how when the Marines recaptured the Citadel and took down the flag. Well, as we know later, as history reports, it was South Vietnamese that did that. But at the time when I was hanging out at the Bong Da Tower, which was a greatly back and forth battlefield, um, I realized that my chances of making it down to the Citadel were probably slim and none. So I hunkered down with Delta 2-1. And I thought, well, I'll just hang out with these guys until we clear off the Dong Ba Tower. And then after that, I'll take my stories, make a run for it, because I don't think I'm going to be here in time for the total bringing down the flag. So that was my goal, was to write the story of taking the flag down. But then my other story was I wasn't going to make it there, so I'd write the stories I already had, which you and I discussed the other day when I read through my notebook stories I had, and I thought, well, this might be a good time to leave and go back down to Fubai and file my story. Well, we got up with the morning and we moved fast on that rebut that was out there, and suddenly we were outgunned and outmanned when we got down there, and that's when the casualties started up, and that was when I got involved with just carrying out wounded, because I didn't have any reason to write stories. That my job was to work as a Marine, so I started carrying out wounded.
That we've talked about the picture review, of course, carrying the wounded Marine, and eventually you're decorated for your actions in Way City and the Citadel for carrying the wounded of Delta 1-5.
Yes, that's correct. I don't know why, but somebody thought what I did was important, and so I received a Bronze Star with Combat Corps combat ribbon for carrying out wounded. But
And
that's what you do. I mean, there came a time when my primary MOS was 0311, which was a Marine infantry. So, at that point, they didn't need one more gun top gunner because they had plenty, but they needed somebody to move casualties, and that looked like a job for me.
Well, and you do this, and I mean it's documented well in some books, the photograph, but I mean at the same time, you're risking your life for Marines that you're not attached to, but at the same time, they're
Yeah,
Marines.
yeah. I guess that's the summary of it. I wasn't part of Delta 15, but I was an attachment, which meant basically I was there to help. And so that's why I ended up carrying casualties. Was I wasn't a gunman. I didn't have the, but I was hauling casualties out, which was more important to me than trying to write stories.
Now, at the time, moving the casualties, were medevac birds able to get into the Citadel, or was what was going on with that situation?
Well, I'm going on my own experience, and that was the things that I remember about being wounded. Of course, the first thing I remembered, I was loaded onto a mule, and they had a couple of with some other casualties and some other wounded, and so the mule, which you understand and have seen pictures of, the mule took us back to the First Arvin Division compound, which was the First Arvin Division, and they had set up a medical battalion, a medical unit, right on the edge of the pond or the waterway in the first division was secured, and so they were basically they were bringing us all in one way or the other, mostly by uh, mostly mostly on small vehicles or whatever they could bring us. Some of them were carried in, and I was fortunate enough, like I said, to be on the mule. The mule drove up to these two corrugated roof structures and unloaded us, and then went back for more. Well, by that time, the triage officer came out. And one thing you know, if you ever been in the Marine, I'm saying Marine, but you can be anywhere else. But if you ever been in a casualty area, first thing you recognize is somebody's going to come by and evaluate your ability to survive. And so the triage clinic, and I hold in great respect those poor medical officers that were thrown into a position where they had to make triage decisions. I think that haunts them for the rest of their life. I was fortunate enough to be pushed over into a corner, given I'd already had two morphine shots, and so I was given a drip of water, and they came by and judged me and said, well, he's a surgery. And I thought, well, that's one good thing going on my favor, is at least I'm a surgery. And what I knew from talking to Dr. Corman and doctors, that's where you wanted to be, because the other two options were not good. Either they faxed you up and sent you back to the front, or you went on a body bag and you went out on the next ride. And so my experience was I was identified as surgery, and there were there were there were two CH-46 Marine helicopters that came into the compound, and they bundled up a group of us that were still on the surgery list, and they put us, and then they were starting to load the casualties in body bags, and they called us off. Something happened. I don't know what, but we were then told that we were then carried out of the CH-46, put on the ground, and of course that one took off for whatever reason, I don't know. But that's where I made my earlier statement. Was I was lying there on a litter with a poncho covering me, and the prop wash from the CH-46 blew the cover back over my face, and I've got two IVs in me, and I got morphine, and I realized that suddenly I'm no longer on that chopper, and my face is covered. And I thought, for God's sake, don't let them think I'm a casualty, because once you put the poncho over the face, you're done. So I'm thinking to myself, somebody's got to get me out of this. Well, one time or the other, they came in and they reloaded another CH-46. Am I saying that right? 46, 47, double rotor grasshopper.
47, I believe, yes.
I'm sorry,
Oh, it's
47.
okay, Bernie, no worries.
Anyway, they came in and they loaded me. Finally somebody pulled the tarp off or the poncho off my face and said, "This one loads." And so they loaded me on the 46 as we're 47 as we're going up, lifting up and trying to get our airspace to get out of Citadel area. I noticed that the chopper that had been the first one we loaded in was cycling back down with smoke coming out of the engine. So I thought, God, this is good. I managed to get on the right chopper. Anyway, I'm not sure where we went with this, but that was my experience.
Well, and with that, I think it's unique because a lot of people, when they think about Marines wounded in Vietnam, they picture the medevac birds coming in, taking the wounded out of the jungle. But in an urban environment, it is different. And the triage is, I think, a unique aspect that I haven't heard about before in an interview.
Really,
Yes, sir.
all mass casualties that we had in Vietnam were triaged going into the aid station. Rather they were so badly wounded that they weren't going to make it. Somebody had to make that choice, and then the other ones had to make the choice of who can still be surgery. The last class, of course, was who could be treated and returned. Well, there were a lot of guys that had a lot of wounds that refused to leave the field, but there were still those three categories that I'm aware of. Either KIA or you were WIA, which is wounded in action, and then there was that was it basically. And so I have to again. I've said over the years, I think if you want to really get the feeling of horror, talk to a surgeon who is designated as the doctor to make the decision. And that had to be a horrible experience because you're looking at somebody bleeding on a poncho or bleeding on a door off a window, and you're making the decision whether or not that person is going to be able to survive surgery. So I really respect anybody that had that casualty officer.
Well, and there's a book that I've got. I'll send you a link to it because I know how much you like to read. But the title of it is "In the Company of Marines: A Surgeon Remembers Vietnam." And I think his last name's Finnegan, but he was a combat surgeon with the 3rd Marine Division and spent time with them at Quezon.
Yeah, yeah,
And fantastic book, but it's very eye-opening to, like you said, the decisions that had to be made on who lives and whose wounds are too fatal to save.
yeah. That that's an experience which I think a number of us might have experienced, but I think others never had that experience. But I was aware of the duties of a casualty officer, and I always thought it was horrendous. Live and die, and here you are, probably a first year out of medical school, and you're dressed up in a uniform, and somebody says you're the casualty officer today. You have to figure out who's going to go, who's going to stay. That's a really hard burden to bear for the rest of your life. So I would like to acknowledge and thank you, whoever it was that made the decision on me. Uh, so I'm grateful.
Well, and you and thousands of other Marines also are in the same boat of the officer for that day that made the decision to pick them to be operated on or to save their life. I mean, it's one of the beautiful things about our story, Bernie, is we get to recognize how you are here today, and that's because an officer made a decision to save your life.
Yeah, yeah. Like I said, there's got to be a power in belief and pray for something. And, you know, I'm thankful for everything I got. Like I say, every day since February 19th, 1968 has been a plus.
Well, and speaking of 19 February 1968, what happened when you got hit? What were you doing?
I was carrying wounded, and we carried him. I ran up and grabbed this Marine off the wall. The corpsman had called for help, and so I was across the street and I ran there. He was trying to get the casualty towards the edge. There were some stairs that went down from the walls of the street. And so I saw that he was struggling with it and he calling for help. And so I dropped the rifle I had and ran out across the street, helped grab him. And when I was grabbing him, I got him hold enough from the corpsman to drag him down the stairs and across the street. And there was a blue bus, kind of a blue one of those transportation vehicles that everybody loaded on. There was a blue bus which was laying on its side, and I ran down the street, and that was when I realized that three civilian photographers or civilian correspondents were there. Al Webb from UPI, Dave Greenway from Time Magazine, and Johnson from the New York Times. And I'm looking at them, they're laying down, they don't know, they're pinned down. And so I ran down towards them and I said, "Give me a hand with this guy, he's bleeding." And two of them correspondents jumped up and ran over to help me drag him. And so we got Michaels over towards the bus, and the corpsman came running up to us, and he said, "We got to get him back, got to get him out of here." And I saw a door, one of those plantation shutter doors, which was we were using as litters because there was no way of carrying them out with nobody had a litter. You just load them onto a door, a window shade, and we loaded them onto the window. And once we're getting ready, that's when I suddenly remembered I got hit because I couldn't. I passed out. I lost track for a few minutes. And when I came to, I could smell cordite and burning flesh. And that's when I realized that when I tried to get up and run to the bus for cover, I couldn't stand up because both legs were hit, and I couldn't do anything but lie on the street in next to the body of the core of the person we were dragging back, Michaels. And I realized that he was bleeding out up there ahead of me, but I couldn't reach him. I couldn't get to him. Finally, some corpsmen and a couple of the civilian photographers or civilian correspondents came running out and grabbed me off the street. They grabbed Michaels off the street, but I could tell he was shot in the throat and he was in terrible condition. But in my case, I still had a couple of pieces of big shrapnel sticking out of my arm and sticking out of my thigh, and but that was the result of being too close. I was always blessed that the B-40 rocket there that got me, I was close enough to it that all the shrapnel was large pieces. If I'd been 10 feet away, they would have been small pieces, which could have been more deadly. Large pieces you could deal with. So the corpsman pulled a couple of pieces out of me before they loaded me onto a mule. And that I told you the rest of the story from there.
Now, when you were hit, due to the adrenaline, did you feel any pain in your legs or in your arms through the shrapnel wounds?
Initially, no, but suddenly I tried to get up and realized that I couldn't move. I was not able to drag myself, couldn't get up, I couldn't run, I couldn't do anything. I was just laying on the road. And I kept yelling for somebody to come and get me off the road because they were snipers, actively shooting around the area because they knew that the wounded were being taken back to this bus on its side, blue bus. And so there was a concern about snipers who were picking off areas of Marines that were dealing with wounded. Anyway, that's as best I can remember.
So you get hit, you go to triage. Eventually, of course, you have operations done, but did they fly you immediately to Japan and have performed the surgery? What was the process there, Bernie?
Now, what happened was I first went in after I was first uh, in the back of there was a battalion aid station set up back in the our first Arvin compound,
Right.
and that was what they used to they when you brought were came in when you came into that compound, you were triaged. And so that in my case, I was triaged. I was put on a chopper, flown to Fubai, and in Fubai, they had what they called a mobile arch surgical tent, a mass tent. And I was finally, after x-rays and everything, moved onto the table. And that's when they told me that it's possible, that they would try to save my arm. And they said, we'll try to get you out of here as quick. But they did field surgery to stem the loss of my blood from the legs and the arm. And so then the next thing I remember was I was in Da Nang BSA, Second Battalion, First Marines, and BSA. And from there, they patched me up, put a new bandages on, gave me some more morphine, and then the last thing I remember was leaving Da Nang Battalion A station with still shrapnel in me, and somewhere in the back of my mind, I think we landed in Philippines at Clark Air Force Base, and from there they loaded us onto I can't remember the designation, but it was a star lifter, a big cargo carrier that was set up was rigged up with stretchers, and they flew us up to Yokohama, Japan, which is where I woke up at the 106th Army Hospital, and that was how I got to Japan. And from there were several surgeries. Uh, I had a broken leg from shrapnel on my right side and my thigh area, and I had more shrapnel in my left leg, and my right arm was pretty much immobile because it had been ripped up. The bone was broken. It was hanging pretty loose until they hooked it up. But that's how I ended up in the 106th Army Hospital in Yokohama, where they did more surgeries. So basically, I got medevaced out of way into the First Division compound, and from there I got medevaced to Da Nang, which was just a stopping point. Loaded us on a plane, and then sent us up to the 106th Army Hospital.
Now, in the hospital, when you start to come through, what's your reaction to being in this hospital where all this surgery's been done? What's the emotional feeling like?
Well, the interesting thing was I was on an amputation ward, casualties were so heavy that, as you can read and context, I mean, there were just massive casualties as a result of the of the Tet Offensive everywhere in Saigon, Da Nang, up the way. So I was put on a ward for amputation. And so the surgeons came by and decided that, I was a candidate for surgery because by that time there was an infection in the arm, what was damaged arm. And so they decided that they would do surgery and probably remove my arm. Well, I'm on the amputation ward with all these Marines who've lost their legs, lost their arms, and I'm the only one that's still intact. I haven't lost and so they're saying to me, yelling across the beds, when are you going to lose? When are you going to lose it? And I just kind of numbed out on everything. But they had they did the best they could. I had two operations in Japan, and it, they they basically did what they could do to save my arm. And eventually, I got sent home to Oak Knoll Naval Hospital in Long Beach. And when I got there, they did one more operation, and it all worked out because I was able to keep my right arm.
Now, do you still have shrapnel within that arm or your leg still today?
Yes, I have looks like buckshot in my right arm, and then I still have some shrapnel. In fact, when we did my hip transplant, they kept saying, "What's all this white stuff? What's all this?" I said, "That's shrapnel." Oh well, we'll just take that out while we're at it. And I thought, well, okay, that's you go right ahead. I don't need it.
Now, did you keep any of the shrapnel that they removed as a souvenir?
Yes, I did. Because I had pieces coming out for several years. Every now and then there'd be a little pimple. You pop it and it'd be a small piece of shrapnel. I had a couple of big pieces of shrapnel that finally came out, and they medically years after that, uh, they was looking at the shrapnel piece broke loose, and it was starting to cause all kinds of frustration and pus pockets and everything. So they went in and removed it. It was about the size of a dime. They had, they hit nail on a dime. But they went in and took it out, and I put it in a little pill bottle with information saying it was a B-40 rocket, February 19th, all that stuff. And then when I had an opportunity to go back in 2017 with a group that was called Greatest Generations, we went back to Way, and they made videos of us going back to Way and talking about. And so I brought that bottle with me, and I went back right to the place that I could cognizantly remember where I was wounded, and I took out the piece of shrapnel and threw it back on the ground, thinking that I returned it to them after they gave it to me. But that was just a significant little niche in my life was, okay, here's a piece of shrapnel. You guys gave it to me, I'm giving it back.
Well, and with that, I mean, and I didn't want to get to this point today, but it brings up a natural question, Bernie, and I'm okay with it. What was it like returning to Vietnam after so many years?
I don't think we got enough time, but um, I had a unique experience coming home as opposed to many of my fellow Marines where they had to run the gauntlet of anti uh, protesters because they went through airports and they were required to wear uniforms. And we've all heard the stories about how they were abused and ignored and terrorized, claiming to be baby killers and dope addicts and fiends and all that. And there were professional agitators in many ways Um, what I remember was because I came home a different way. I came home loaded on a star lifter filled with casualties, and we landed at Travis Air Force Base in California. And then I was loaded and flown down to Oak Knoll Naval Hospital in Oakland, California. And no, not Oakland. I was sent to Long Beach Naval Hospital in Long Beach because that was close to where my wife was living. And so I got home, got back to the hospital, and I was there for about 2 weeks before I could get convalescent leave to go home. And it was just a trial thing. It didn't. I wasn't ready to really wasn't ready to go home yet because I still needed more recovery. But anyway, I went and when they said, okay, all of you guys that are granted leave meet at this location. So I went down there anticipating. He said, okay, now the most important thing for you to do, take off your uniform and put on civilian clothes. And I'm thinking, why? And he said, because on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, at all exits of the parking garage, there's a group of anti-war protesters that will beat on your car, yell at you, scream, and so the thing to do is take your uniform off so you look like a civilian leaving the area. And I'm thinking, all this time, all this time, I figured I'd come home with my uniform on, have some pride in that, and I'm robbed of it. I can't go out the hospital with my uniform on because of the protests in the street. So that was what I remember. Probably one of the more poignant memories of coming home was, I was sheltered from it all the way from Japan to Travis down to Long Beach. But when you got to Long Beach, it was realization that and I stayed there after my leave was up. I came back and went back into the hospital, and I could see them out there on the weekend. They covered all three exits to the parking garage. So anyway, I thought it was there was a little bitterness, a little anger, the idea that I couldn't wear my uniform, which had looked forward to because I had enough medals to make me credible. And so anyway, that was coming home for me. And so I didn't have to run the gauntlet at airfields or bus stations or train stations like some of the guys had to do. I was somewhat in a protected environment. I was in a naval hospital, but I still had to deal with the anger and the angst and the vitriol that was being heaped on us if we didn't go as civilians. Anyway, that's a memory.
Well, and it's interesting the experience you had coming home. Do you still have your uniform?
Oh yes, I still have my dress blues, and I still have a set of dress. I have a set of jungle utilities that I
Wow.
managed to bring home. I still have my greens. I don't ask me why, but I keep pushing them away in the back of the closet. And my wife said, "What are you going to do with those?" And I said, "I have no idea, but I'm not giving them away just yet. Maybe when I'm 90."
That's a good time in there. And now, how did you get the utilities home?
The utilities.
Yeah, how'd you sneak that home?
It's an amazing story. Along with the fact that I was going to take a picture and send to you today, I somehow or the other, my NVA backpack, because did you hear the story about getting a backpack from the NVA?
Not yet. No.
Well, the Marines, of course, issued us backpacks that had, in my case, it was dated 1944. So we were all given this old 782 gear that, was from World War II. Well, that backpack was a pain in the ass because it didn't carry a lot. and a bank, and it had an e-tool on it. So I discovered from the old salts was next time you get into the battle with the NBA, get one of their packs because their packs were superior. I mean, you could put a lot of stuff in that pack, including ammunition, foods, clothes, and the army later on developed it as and took it as an example of their backpacks, long range reconnaissance kind of stuff. So anything that you get was an NBA pack. Well, I managed to get into a fight with the NBA early in my career. And when we were going through the bodies for information, I happened to take the pack. And so on the back of the pack, I had written ISO storyteller. And I don't know what happened to that pack because the day I went out to get hit, we all dropped our packs in the back in the rear area, in what qualified as rear area. And we just to make the attack on the Don Von Tower, and that way we all dumped our packs. Well, after I got hit, I had no idea what happened to my pack, no idea. I'm thinking that Dale or somebody found it for me, because when you get wounded like that in your medevac, they have to go through all your footlocker, and they got to read your letters and make sure there's no photos, nothing incriminating, and everything. Somehow, and when they shipped back what was left of my stuff, there was my backpack. Somebody had managed to save my backpack, and I still have it downstairs in the locker. You know, it's just a great memory to me.
Well, it's an awesome piece of history to have. I mean, to have the personal pack that you carried, that's incredible.
Yeah, it was amazing that somebody. I've never been clear to this day how it got in my footlocker that they shipped home after they'd gone through it, because the interesting thing there was when you get hit like that, they have a casualty officer that comes down to your area, and they find that you've got a trunk box or something with with personal information. So the casualty officer has to go down, open it up, and take a complete inventory of everything that's in it, including, and they have to read letters to make sure look to make sure there's no photographs that are embarrassing or giving away any issue. And so what happens is you're sitting there, and they had to have a witness. So they got one of my buddies, one of my combat correspondents, Dave Martinez, and Dave was supposed to be helping the casualty officer. Well, when you have, as I did, I had a new pair of boots, I had a new jungle jacket, and I had a jungle uh, web belt. And when I got the locker back, there was a pair of 11 and a half inch uh, shoes, boots that were worn out that had Martinez stamped on them. And over where my brand new jungle jacket was gone, and a substitute, because you had to have a complete inventory. So as somebody got my jungle jacket, somebody got my pants, and all I could get is one pair of trousers that had the back end ripped out of it, and I believe that probably belonged to one of my fellows. Uh, because anyway, what the story is, when they surveyed your trunk and they did the casualty report, if you had a pair of new boots, all you had to do was identify new boots, and whoever had a pair of old boots could put them in there. So you had the inventory, and meanwhile they got the new boots, which was fair. It's like going through casualties. You saw a casualty with a pair of better boots than you had. There was nothing, it was important to switch it out. He didn't need them anymore, but you did. Just gallows humor.
Well, and I think that's a lot of people don't understand that you take what's necessary. I mean, you're right, gallows humor, but you need it more than a person who's no longer with the living.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sorry, but my boots are rotted. and those are boots are brand new, and it's a casualty. Not going to need them. I need them now because my boots are shot. So, it was not uncommon to take boots primarily, because those were the most important things you had a hard time getting resupplied on. So it's the reality.
Now, speaking of just some of the things that you brought home, Bernie, did you bring home any other souvenirs outside of this pack that gets shipped to you? Did you bring home anything else?
Well, I didn't have much to bring home, because I didn't go through the usual returning things where they screened all your information. And you had to identify which was your gear and all this and that. In my particular case, I was sent home, and about about 2 months later, I get my foot locker back, which was made by the Vietnamese down the bill, and that's where I had my, you know, that was where they had changed out my boots, changed out my utilities, changed out everything that they needed, and which was fair because I probably benefited from a pair or two. Uh, but when the trunk came home, I opened it up, and the first thing I was amazed to see was my backpack, which I just never believed. I don't ever remember. All I remember is the day we took off on the 19th and start moving ahead. We all dropped our packs, which was normal. So you could move quickly and get out, but nobody wanted a backpack full on their way. And so the only other, I think the only other thing I acquired or that was in there was probably uh, I had a I had a C ration cup with a wire that was and so I turned it into a coffee cup with a C ration can with wire from the C ration box and a 50 caliber round that I had had the caliber I had the tanker fire it so I could have the shell. And so it was a coffee cup made out of a C ration cup with a wire handle mounted to a 50 caliber re, uh, casualty cartridge.
That's incredible.
I still have it.
Wow.
It's down in my trunk in the basement with my pack that says ISO storyteller. I don't know what I'm going to do with it. I don't know what my kids would do with it. I have no idea. Uh, I'm afraid that a lot of these things I haven't made as important uh, symbols of my experience. And so as a result, you know, what are they going to do with all the dad's stuff? Well, dad's got a whole back, a dumpster of all the stuff. And where does it go? Uniforms. Why am I hanging on to uniforms? Where do they go? Well, you just don't take them down to Goodwill or Salvation Army and let them go into the rag bag. They're too important for that. So there's certain things that you wonder, like I've shared with you, all of my BC pamphlets. I've shared with you my money and North Vietnamese money. I've shared with you, a lot of the things that I have no idea what's going to happen to. The most concerning is what would I do with all my notebooks, all the notebooks from the field? I think I'm not unique in the fact that many of us combat soldiers, Marines, Navy, Airmen, we've kept all these things in your trunk. And when you die, who's going to take care of them? Who wants them? Where do they go? That's a dilemma, uh, one which I have not confronted yet. Where do you send? There's no museum to send it to. There's no organization that would value it. So it's yet to be determined, I guess.
Well, and I mean, I can't imagine the dilemma that you and hundreds of, or thousands of other combat veterans face of when it comes to that point, what do you do with it? I mean, I know plenty of people have found all sorts of uniforms, artifacts that people have thrown in the trash. I mean, and that's your legacy.
Yeah, yeah, that's that. The very good word, Zach. It's a legacy of a person in their lifetime, and it's to some families they value it. To other families they don't know what the value is and what the circumstances are and what what to do with it. And I think it's a dilemma that's happening to a lot of us Vietnam veterans because of age. What did you bring home? What did you keep? Because we all kept something. I mean, you kept uniforms, you kept uh, tools, whatever it was that you had, and there, if they were valuable enough to keep for 60 years, they should be valuable to someone.
Sir.
But you don't, partly because we never discussed the war with our children and our family members. We never got into the really important stuff like you and I've talked about. And so in the end, it's hard for them to place a value on it. My grandchildren and my children, they know I've got these things that are important to me. But how do I make them important to them? Well, after all these years, it's too late to start talking about the war. Does that make any sense?
It makes perfect sense. I mean, I've had veterans tell me the same thing. I've had a few veterans in the past give me some aspects or give me some artifacts, things that they brought back just because I've interviewed them and they knew that it would be cherished. I mean, that's why I've got this right here. You know what this is as well as anybody. Sea tigers. I find them, I collect them, and I use them. I think it's a blip in time to March 22, 1967, of what was happening in Vietnam.
You know,
And it's, I mean, at some point you would think you've got the National World War II Museum. There's got to be a museum that opens up strictly that's about Vietnam. I mean, the Marine Corps has its section, the Marine Corps Museum, but you know, what are they going to do with hundreds of thousands of Marine artifacts? You can't showcase them all. Versus, I don't know, maybe I'm rambling, but someone at some point's got to do something to honor the Vietnam veterans and honor what was brought back because it's history.
you know. And then, like as you said, the Marine Corps Memorial Museum at Quantico, they do a very good job. But it's not indicative that there's not because there's so much of the history that they're trying to display and examine and explain. That you get cut for 1 10-second cubicle of information. We need a museum. I think we need a museum that can be dedicated just to the Vietnam experience. The Marine Corps experience is wonderful from 1775 forward, but it's still not enough time to recognize that particular time, that particular war, that particular issue. And that's one of the things that you're doing, my friend, is you're leaving a vocal article description of what happened in a particular war that was unpopular. And then for that, it takes a master in history to be successful at that. But you've created a great legacy for many people who had none. Really, your whole series dealing with Vietnam veterans has really just illuminated and in some cases released some of the people with bad memories or back memories. But the more important is we've left an audio trail. It's kind of like I say about headstones, tombstones. people who do not leave a tombstone are are going to be subject to ignorance. When you put a tombstone down, at least you're saying to nothing else but I was here. And that's what you're doing here is you're laying out tombstones for people saying I was here.
Bernie, you humble me. I'm
Yeah.
just a simple man with a passion, and the passion just happens to be making friends with men like yourself and getting to know your story of how you're here today and through the best and worst times of your life in the jungles and in the urban environments of Vietnam.
Well, we thank you. You've given us a chance to leave our legacy. And your students will share our legacy that will go on as long as you're providing this teaching and this instruction and this observation. The rest of us feel confident that you'll guard and educate what we have experienced.
Bernie, that's emotional in a way for me to hear, just because uh, I just never thought about it as that aspect of I'm just gathering your story, let alone the impact I'm having on you veterans. I mean, to me, that means the world. As somebody who didn't serve, I'm just a history teacher. The fact that you think this highly of me, of what I'm doing, just it's the best. It's the best birthday present I could ask for. Truth be told, my friend.
Happy birthday again. Like I said, watch out for the speed bumps on the way to 40.
I'll make sure to do that.
Yeah.
Um, but to
Shall we
continue, go ahead, Bertie.
shall we meet again sometime?
Yes, sir. I was going to ask you one final question if you have time.
Of course, I'm going nowhere. I'm retired.
With talking about legacy, I don't. I want to talk about you, Bernie. With this right here, what is it like knowing that sea tigers are still out there, for where people can read about your legacy and your words about little people, Marines from all walks of life, and these right here? How does that feel?
It feels good to know that the depictions that I tried to create by my stories still have value. That's the thing that makes me most gratitude gracious is that people such as yourself, there's still an outlet for people to read what I wrote. And that's important to me because it is basically it's a period of my life that can that'll be with me for the rest of my days. And the fact that there's a source and a place where all that stuff is available in your particular case, all the materials that you've gathered from the sea tiger still gives us what I would call gives us life. You know, you can look and see, well, who was Last Corporal Don, Don Shepperford? Who was, you know, Tom Donlin? Who was David Martinez? Those were people who originally got a byline. There were dozens that never got bylines, but some of us got bylines. And those bylines, like I discovered when I went to work for the Napa Register after I got out of the hospital, went to work for them, and you can't eat headlines. They're not nourishing, but memories are. And so the end result is those memories. When you see a sea tiger, and it's by Corporal Gustav Hasford writing a story, then what you've got is you've got a piece of Lincoln history to an individual, not just a name, not just a byline, but when you can look into it, you can see that person. And that's what this does, as far as I'm concerned. It gives life to those bylines.
Well, it's an honor that I have to have become an acquaintance with you over the last several months, starting back in the summer of last year, calling you my friend. In many ways, a mentor with your passion for history. It's an honor, Bernie. It really is.
Well, I don't want us to end the conversation.
Oh Lord, no.
continue on and see how that other salmon goes with your friend down the hall.
By all means, we'll definitely
But
be sharing that.
anytime you want to talk or you have any issue that you want to know what little I have value in, I mean, I'm pretty much a cylinder of just one thing, but uh, I'd be happy to provide anything I can.
Well, this is definitely far from our last interview, my friend. I want to segue into after the war, and in our next interview, I want to talk about what it was like to go back to Vietnam because I've seen some of those photographs, and I think that's a poignant aspect of coming back for a full circle. What was that like for you? But for
Yeah.
today, my friend. This was phenomenal as always. It is a pleasure to call you my friend, to work with Bernie, the storyteller Bernston. I mean, truth be told, it's an honor, my friend. It's a great time to always get with you and hear what you have to say because your stories are immaculate.
Well, most of them are true, but
Uh,
I would really like to know the feedback you're getting from your class if you have time sometime.
Absolutely. I'll let you know. And this week's exam week for us, my friend. But once we get back to our regular scheduled program, I'll poll them and we'll see what they think and I'll get back to you.
Well, you got my confidence, and I'll provide any help I can,
Thank you, Bernie.
no matter how misguided it is.
Well, just know that hopefully soon, within perhaps this summer, you and I will hopefully, I hope, be having a drink together in Washington because I do want to come visit and at least have the honor of speaking to you in person.
We have a bed and board anytime you can show up.
I will definitely put that on the list, my friend.
Please do. We look good in the summer. In the winter, we don't look good, but we look good in the summer.
Uh,
Hang in there, my friend.
I
Thank you
will,
so much.
Bernie.
Bye
As
now.
as always, thanks for your service and welcome home, Bernie.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. As I said, I didn't realize I was gone. All right.